I'm old enough already. I did find that. Okay. Okay. Figure out where we might be at the end of the day. Well, I don't know. I'll be right back here. So we're going to be at 3 or 4 o'clock session. Yeah. Oh, that'll be after night, so we'll be right. Good morning. Welcome to the 9 a.m. session of the Partnering Conference. My name is Jerry Leslie. I'm with American Engineering, and I'm this morning's moderator. It's my pleasure to introduce the speaker of this next session, History of KYTC from 1912 to 2021. This should be very interesting. Amanda Abner, we've worked on numerous projects. I know she's always worried when she sees me in historic preservation. So Amanda is a native of Lexington, Kentucky, and holds a master's degree in historic preservation from the University of Kentucky. She began working for KYTC as an intern in 2003 and has been with the Division of Environmental Analysis full-time since 2004. Welcome to Amanda. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm gonna leave my mask on because we're not sure if we're supposed to take them off or leave them on. So if I start to mumble or I'm muffled, just call me out and let me know, and I'll try to speak clearly or take it down. Yeah. Okay. And this is going to be pretty informal. So if you have any questions while I'm going, just raise your hand or get my attention. Just going to run through the history briefly because it's actually, we'd probably be here for a few days if we talked about everything. So, or longer. It's we've been around for a long time. Okay, obviously, we had roads in Kentucky prior to the existence of the highway department. And the first laws relating to road building in Kentucky go back to the earliest days of statehood. So you can see that there's always been an importance placed on building and regulating roads. Although it didn't really come together in a well-organized way until the early 1900s. Pressing button on that. Okay. In the early 19th century, road funding was both a public and a private enterprise. Some of the earliest turnpike companies were the Lexington to Louisville and Lexington to Maysville companies. And Lexington to Maysville Turnpike is basically modern day US 68 Bryan Station Road, that corridor. And it's a very historic corridor, so that comes up from time to time. That we encounter things having to do with that. But it wasn't completed until 1830. But again, it was an important interstate route that connected Kentucky with adjoining states. And the federal government was going to pay $100,000 towards the construction of the road, and Andrew Jackson vetoed the bill, which actually set a precedent and prevented the federal government from being involved in road building really to any real extent until the early 1900s. Which is, you think about today, I mean, it's hard to really build a road without federal involvement of some sort these days. In 1835, Kentucky formed the Board of Internal Improvement, which I guess you could say was kind of the earliest incarnation of a highway department. Funded construction by purchasing half the stock, the other half was purchased from private citizens or by private citizens in county courts, stock that was needed to build and maintain the turnpikes. Sylvester Welch was appointed chief engineer, and that's important because this is one of the first times you see engineering brought into road building. They recognized that there was some expertise needed to build some of these roads and bridges. He also required contracts and paid labor, which is an important key here because it aided in the quality of the product to have more skilled labor working and to have some sort of oversight over the construction process. But this only lasted until 1859, which I guess 24 years was a pretty good run for the first shot at it. But the railroad boom kind of made roads a little less important for a while. And after it was gone, basically the last half of the 19th century, road construction was in the hands of private industry and private turnpike companies, which wasn't a great thing. There was a wide variance in the quality of the turnpikes. And people weren't happy, to say the least. There were violent protests against turnpike companies in Kentucky. They burned over 300 toll gates, toll houses in 44 different counties. And in 1896, the General Assembly passed a bill that required all the turnpikes to be free of tolls. At this point, the federal government still isn't involved, but they're getting there. One of the most important things that led to the development of state highway departments, not just in Kentucky, but around the nation, was the Good Roads movement, which Good Roads magazine was published by the League of American Wheelmen, which is a bicyclist organization. And I guess bicyclists have always been kind of active in organizing and getting things done. So nothing's changed there. But Good Roads magazine started in 1891. If you're interested in this sort of thing, a lot of these are searchable online in full text. It's just kind of a cool snapshot of that period in time and kind of the propaganda that they were putting out there to argue for good roads. And I say propaganda because there was still a lot of resistance to government involvement in road building. And I don't know, probably not that clear, but the cover of the magazine, the top of the illustration is captioned "Good Roads," and you can see the happy wagons and happy horses, and the bottom is "Bad Roads," and they're all stuck in the mud. So so again, state highway departments around the country were born out of the Good Roads movement. New Jersey, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York were the first road departments prior to 1900. Kentucky, we're a little slow again. So the 1890 Constitution prohibited the state from funding highways, but that was amended by 1909. So the federal government starts to get involved in the 1890s within the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So as you can see in the little timeline there, there's a sort of changing of names, and with that, the responsibilities also changed, but they're gradually encompassing a bigger role in road building. And the Office of Road Inquiry and Public Roads on the national level, one thing that they did was publish bulletins with engineering specs and plans to kind of aid these state departments and I guess states that didn't have departments yet in road building and bridge building. And the Department of Agriculture also published bulletins for farm buildings. One of the big things around this time was sanitary engineering, farm buildings, like concrete milk barns, things like that. So it wasn't just roads that were getting this attention where they need to be modernized. It was really all aspects of life. So in Kentucky, so we've made it to 1912, which is when the Department of Public Roads was formed, and that was the first name of what is basically today the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet. They started with 5 employees, which they had a big job ahead of them. So the law required the governor to appoint a commissioner of public roads, again, educated in civil engineering. So again, we see the importance placed on engineering coming into the picture. And one of the reasons for that was that they had seen the poor products that would result when non-trained individuals were in charge of building roads and bridges. One of the other things that came out of this was there were county road engineers appointed in each county, and they could use the Department of Public Roads for assistance in road building. They could request plans, etc., but they were required to measure and submit reports on the roads within their counties. And they also had to keep the standard plans and specs on file. They didn't have to use them, but they had to put them in a cabinet somewhere. So by 1940, the state focuses more on funding. And also at this point, we see the first formation of highway districts. So again, that's something that's carried through for over 100 years in this state, is that we have highway districts. And starting out with 10 is pretty good. It's pretty close to what we have today with the 12 districts. And I'm not sure exactly how those counties were split up, but it's probably pretty similar to what we see today in the districts. Department of Public Roads, one of the things they did was publish annual and biennial reports, which I guess a lot of state government departments did to kind of make the public aware, or at least make the information available of what they were spending money on and how much progress they were making. That was always a major focus, is we have fixed this, we've made it better. And it became, highway improvements became so important. It was a major issue that elected Governor Stanley into office. Here's some statistics that just kind of show kind of the rapid growth of the road system. So in 10 years, in the early 1900s, almost 20,000 miles of roads, or over 20,000 miles of roads, were added to the state system. They weren't all improved, but it was still a growth over the percentage that was improved in 1904. And the Good Roads Yearbook, 1916, which again was part of the Good Roads magazine, the League of Wheelmen, they reported on Kentucky that 757 bridge plans have been made, 1,400 miles of new road have been surveyed, and 1,400 miles of old road have been inspected. So, and 787 miles have been constructed, which, if you think about it, we're not building anywhere near 787 new miles of road today. It's been a while since we've been able to build like that. So they really were pushing highway construction in the early 1900s. So in 1919, the funding for rural post office roads was passed in the Federal Aid Road Act, which stipulated that the construction had to meet standards enacted by the federal government. And it also provided half the funding for bridges over 20 feet in length, which the 20 feet in length for bridges is something that we still see today in the bridge inspection database. Anything that's under 20 feet isn't inspected, so it's considered older. And I'm not sure if this was the origin of that or if it's some sort of engineering terminology for bridges, but that's the first time I've noticed that appearing. So in 1920, the Department of State Roads and Highways was formed by the legislature. Again, that was another name change, but it also reorganized the duties of the department and added more responsibilities. 1926, it's changed again to State Highway Department, and then 1930, Department of Highways. So for almost 100 years, the Department of Highways has existed under that name. Duties have changed, but it's pretty impressive that we still have a department that sells that name. So you can't talk about road building without talking about politics. You can, but we all know politics has historically been a major issue in road building. And as more money was pumped into highway projects and roads and bridges, obviously politicians became more interested. In 1922, there was a bill that would have completely politicized the state highway department, but it didn't pass. It would have been basically just at the pleasure of whatever party was in the governor's office. So in the 1930s, probably one of the biggest contributors to road building was the New Deal. And the Department of Highways continued building roads with state funds, but also worked on these works projects. And sometimes if you look at like archived highway plans, you can see some of these abbreviations on them. And again, just throughout the 30s, a lot of the agencies reorganized and names changed, but they basically serve the same function. The WPA, which a lot of times is kind of the name given incorrectly to all the New Deal agencies, was its own agency, and it didn't come about until 1935, and it was dissolved in 1943. The Kentucky Department of Rural Highways was the first highway office in the nation that focused strictly on rural highways, and the projects were jointly administered with the WPA. And by 1938, all public roads and bridges in Kentucky were the responsibility of the highway department. Here's just a couple of images from old plans that show WPA, the U.S. Public Works Project. So once we get out of the Depression, go straight into World War II, which obviously was a time of low activity. A lot of employees that worked for the highway department, which at that time were primarily men, were called up to serve in the war. And one tidbit is that they wanted to make sure that they could have their jobs when they returned from the war. There was some rules written that said that. They focused a lot on planning for post-war building at this time, simply because of the shortage of labor and materials. Any projects that were underway were finished. But another product of the shortage was a scholarship program, which was established in 1948. And again, that's something that is carried through this day and is a really important part of what the cabinet does. This is just a pamphlet that I found at an antique store not too long after I started working at the transportation cabinet. They had a stack of them. I think I paid $1 or $2 for it. It says $2 on it. But it covers the period from 1948 to 1952. And it was put out by the public, I'm not sure if it was called the Public Information Office initially, but that entity within the cabinet started publishing things like this to kind of let the public know what the department had been up to and how they were spending money. And also, again, it was propaganda, like this is better than the old way. We made it better. just aesthetically, it's not like it. It's kitschy. We have traded this for this. So the old ferry for the big lake bridges. Again, this is just that idea of progress that really was pervasive, really beyond transportation within state government in the 1930s, mid-century. And if anybody wants this PDF, if you're interested, you can email me, I can send it to you. There's some department employees hard at work. So after World War II, probably the most impactful project was the interstate system, good and bad. It was actually planned before the war. It was resurrected as a defense project afterwards, with the federal government sharing responsibility for the cost. Created, again, uniform standards. Standardization was a really important concept from the outset of the department in the early 1900s. And again, it wasn't just Kentucky, it was around the nation, and standardization was important. So there are some tidbits. Of course, a lot more happened in the 60s and 70s and 80s than what is summarized there. But again, we'd be here all day to go through everything. But the name Kentucky Transportation Cabinet came around in 1982. If anyone was curious how we got that name or when. One of the components of the road building program, of course, is bridges. Basically follow the same process as turnpikes did. They received charters, local committees, toll bridges existed. But they weren't necessarily built in conjunction with the turnpikes. The turnpikes were built and then they figured out how to cross the water. Earliest bridges were timber, which didn't last long until they put a roof on them. So we have, I think, 12 or 13 covered bridges left in the state. I know that one burned earlier this year, unfortunately. I'm not sure what the latest tally is. One of the most important bridges really in the country and in Kentucky is the Roebling Bridge. And it's kind of hard to, for me personally anyway, to not talk about it if we're talking about the history of the transportation cabinet. So we're just going to take a little diversion to the Roebling. And it was actually planned or started in 1856 and delayed by the Civil War. So it took a while to build. And the Department of Highways purchased it in 1953 for $4.2 million. and the tolls remained on it until 1963 when French Fence opened. And see Josh Rogers back there. I got an email one day that somebody had I don't remember, they gave it to you, or I think somebody retired from Palmer, maybe. Yeah, anyway, the scrapbook, which unfortunately is number 2. I'm not sure where number 1 is, but that would cover an earlier period than this. This pretty much covered the 1880s through, I think, the 20s. And it's just full of newspaper clippings. It's great. It's really cool. So that's scanned. Again, if anybody wants to see that, I think Palmer also did a scan of it. There's a couple of them floating around out there. But it's full of news clippings, toll tickets. You can see where the little tickets were punched for each crossing. And those were the toll booth attendants in that picture. From 1921, I think that was the date on that article. There's a drawing of the truss retrofit being built, aerial photo of some of the bridges in northern Kentucky, early 1900s aerial photo, which I'm not sure, guessing it was probably taken from a balloon, maybe. I'm not sure where it was taken from. There is the Roebling in 1895, that's prior to the truss being retrofitted. And you notice the towers look like they do today. For some reason, when the truss was built, they put little domes on the tower, which were removed. There was a major rehab in the 90s, and they recreated the original. Domes. So again, going back to just general bridge construction within the department, it was a major focus of the Department of Public Roads. There's a pamphlet that was published in 1912 that was a series of essays or speeches from different engineers within the department that just really trashed the private committees and trust bridge companies. They did not like the way they did things. The combined eloquence of half a dozen bridgemen. So the bridge companies would send representatives out to these county or committee meetings when they were selecting the bridge builder and who to order their truss bridge from. But some of them were good, and they do admit that kind of begrudgingly, I think. But there were also some disasters and collapses of bridges, so it wasn't really an unjustified criticism. And again, they wanted the counties to use engineering services and use professionals. So we see truss bridges become kind of outmoded in the early 1900s, really by the 1920s, due to rising steel prices, and reinforced concrete proves to be a more efficient technology and material, especially for shorter bridges. The earliest concrete bridge in Kentucky that we still have is the Belknap Memorial Bridge in Sheridan Park here in Louisville from 1901. So that's a concrete bridge that is 120 years old. There's an old tiny picture of it. You can see on the left side, there's a car, probably from the 1930s. It actually looks better today. It's a little overgrown there. So it was recently rehabilitated, I believe. We had projects that took care of several of the Cherokee Park bridges. So again, standardization was important for bridge construction. Just in the first year of the department, they developed 25 standard plan sets. And again, when you think about 5 employees working, so they were pretty busy hand drawing bridge plans. New federal requirements were established in 1920, however, so all the plans that had been developed prior to that were no longer useful. And there was a fire in 1929 that destroyed all special plans, like plans that were developed for non-standard sites. But the standard plans were at a fireproof safe because they were so important. So I don't know why the special plans weren't in the safe as well, but you live and learn. But I think the highway department offices in Frankfurt were destroyed in that fire. That was a pretty terrible thing that happened. In the 20s, the Murphy Toll Bridge Act, I believe it was amended in 1930, but it allowed toll bridges to be purchased, condemned, or built using bonds. And so 11 new bridges were built. They were river truss bridges, like the Kentucky River bridges. And by 1947, 9 of them no longer had tolls because the bonds had been written. Interstate system increased the number of bridges, the overpasses. And going back to the interstate system, initially 763 miles were planned to be built through Kentucky of I-65, 64, 75, 71, 264, and it's projected to be finished at a cost of $48 million. So think about that number today, it would be a lot higher. I think I-64 between Louisville and Frankfurt received an award for its beauty at this point also, early in the interstate years. And kind of around the same time, the parkway system came about. I put the old names of parkways on there, so we know what they turned into. But they were originally tolled, and I couldn't remember when the last tolls were removed. I thought it was earlier than 2010. That doesn't seem like that long ago, but the last tolled parkways were on and Hatcher. And I have fond memories of going through toll booths for some reason when I was a child. I don't know why, but it always seemed exciting to hear the change go in the bucket. This is Mountain Parkway, Campton. This is Owensboro. I think that's one or Natcher. And Kentucky Turnpike. And I believe all of the toll plazas have been demolished at this point. Seems like we've had one maybe in Russell County on the Cumberland Parkway for a while that is still standing, but I think it's gone too. Maybe the office building might still be there. So as far as modern projects go, and I know I'm skipping ahead and leaving out a lot of important history, probably from the 70s and 80s, but again, we would be here for a long time. Of the modern projects that are monumental and historic, I've listed these off the top of my head. There are others, but these projects will still be talked about in the future and looked at and studied. Probably a lot of people in this room have worked on at least one or all of these projects at some point. So thank you. Contribution to history. And just, it would be hard to really cover this in depth in a presentation just about general history. But there's a lot of social issues tied into road building as well. And because of things that happened a lot of times in the 50s and 60s with the interstate system, and displacement of minority communities, entire communities were bulldozed. Cities use the interstates as reasons to justify zoning laws that displace neighborhoods. So there was kind of a trickle-down impact that affected a lot of people that didn't really have a voice at the time. So out of that, and also some of the environmental destruction that happened, we ended up with a lot of laws that still affect what we do today, which affects what I do. Environmental Historic Preservation Act is a big one, and that wasn't just spurred by the interstate. There were a lot of things going around nationally. Destruction, the demolition of Penn Station in New York City was a big impetus for that. But not National Environmental Policy Act 1969 was kind of directly in response to a lot of controversies with the interstate system construction. And we talk about it sometimes, but the interstate system couldn't be built today like it was. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like I said, it displaced a lot of people who did not have a voice at the time, and there's a lot of environmental destruction. So it's important that we remember that, and that we take advantage of these things that were built a long time ago, but at what cost? So, and then just one little tidbit I want to touch on because I think it's really fascinating. There is a cemetery on one of our maintenance lots on Wilkinson Boulevard. There's no grave markers, but if you look back in the deeds, the area is clearly defined, called out. It's called out as a burial ground. It was actually the third prison cemetery for when the prison was located in Frankfurt. And we found out about this. One of the archaeologists in DEA got an email about looking into an alleged cemetery in the maintenance lot because they wanted to do some improvements or construction. So we started looking into it, and indeed there is a cemetery there. It was being used most recently as a dog run for the state police dogs. And there's a sign on it, it says dog run or something akin to that. It's not marked as a cemetery. I think Dan Davis recommended that a sign be placed out there that says that there is a burial ground there. I'm not sure if that happened, but maintenance is aware of it, and nothing is going to happen to it. But from 1888, basically, probably until 1936, this would have been used as a cemetery. Research I've done seems like a few people would die each month at the cemetery. So you can do the math on that figure, or the prison, not the cemetery. kind of figure out that there are probably many burials out there. That wasn't the only place that the deceased prisoners were sent, but that there are several out there. I've kind of skimmed through some old death certificates, which are only searchable after 1911. But there's definitely people buried out there. So, anyway, that is all I have, and it's like we have 3 minutes left. So, does anyone have questions or comments? I apologize. I feel like I was rambling a little bit through some of that, but a little tired this morning. Thank you.
Yeah.